Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We have not been here for like a week, which is an extremely long for us to take off, Sap. But I had some dental surgery last week. It was relatively quiet on the NBA front, so if there was any week to take off, I feel like it was okay to just do one podcast last week.
We sound like two old men. You're going for dental surgery. I'm
Yes.
having cataracts out in a couple of weeks. Lord knows whatever else we've got to get done. But this is the off season, right? So this is time to get healthy so that when training camps open the end of September, that we'll be ready, willing, and able to do podcasts at a moment's notice. Um, Although there really is never an off season in the NBA, but this is kind of a little bit of a lull before training camps open in a few weeks.
Yeah, and I wanted to give, football a chance to breathe a little bit. People are very excited for the start of the NFL season, ourselves included. So, I think give them their week to shine.
Speak for yourself.
Well, you were excited prior to the Packers game, I'm sure.
Yeah, 4:25 on Sunday. I was looking forward to it.
Yeah, it was over. But before that, I'm sure you're excited.
As my man said, RELAX. It's a long season.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll talk a little bit about Aaron Rodgers at some point, I'm sure. But back to the NBA stuff. Over the weekend, we saw a new class go into the Hall of Fame, a very Celtic-centric class, which is what I feel like the Hall of Fame should be every year. Just put in more Celtics. Paul Pierce goes into the Hall of Fame, as does Bill Russell as a coach. He's obviously already in there as a player. And Mike Gorman gets the Kirk Gowdy Award for media in the NBA. Well-deserved for Mike Gorman, the voice of the Celtics on TV for, almost 40 years now, I think. Right, Seb?
I was in high school when he started doing Celtics games. That's how long it's been, and I'm 58 years old. And as great as Mike Gorman is as a broadcaster, he's even a better person. I got to, meet him on several occasions back in the 80s when I was in there for every game covering the Celtics in the NBA as a freelancer for ESPN, and got to just get, friendly and have conversations with him. As nice a man you'd ever meet, in addition to being a brilliant broadcaster.
Yeah, we've obviously been spoiled having Mike Gorman for so long doing the play-by-play, and we have great radio play-by-play guy too, and Sean Grandy. I think most people expect Grandy to take over the TV side when Mike Gorman eventually retires, hopefully not anytime soon, because I think he's still tremendous at it. I do think last season was difficult for a lot of broadcasters because they weren't in the arenas, which, again, Mike Gorman's been doing this for 40, 50 years, and then suddenly you say, okay, we're going to do this a little bit differently this year. I think that throws you off your game a little bit.
Yeah, especially the older guys, because all of a sudden, as we know, and you're much younger than I am, but, people become creatures of habit, right? So you're used to getting to the arena at a certain time and having a routine and talking to the coaches and the players and, having dinner at a certain time. And then you go courtside to call the game. Well, that was all blown up last year. So now a lot of the broadcasters are doing it in a studio, or they're doing it from home, staring at a 46 or a 55-inch screen TV. So they're at the mercy of whatever the director is sending them. So, they can't really paint the picture the way they have normally done it. So I think that a lot of the old broadcasters had difficulty with that. We saw Marv Albert, I think, struggled last year, in addition to being 80 years old. And look, Marv Albert to me is the greatest basketball play-by-play man ever. But yeah, I think they had some difficulty with that. And also it was a difficult year for Mike Gorman because he was without his partner of 40 years in Tommy Heinsohn. Those two guys were so close, and not to have Tommy Heinsohn with him, and then also to deal with this whole new way of doing things. It was kind of an unsettling year for Mike Gorman. Hopefully they'll let them back into the arenas this year, and he can start to develop some chemistry with Brian Scalabrine, although I'm not as hopeful about that, because Scalabrine to me is a tough listen and maybe a tough guy to work with, especially when you're talking about Mike Gorman, who's 75, and you got Scalabrine, who's like 40 and has got a ton of energy. It's almost like he's got ADHD, that is all over the place. And I don't know if Gorman will be able to adjust to that. Although, he had to reel in Tommy Heinsohn quite a bit because Tommy was Mr. Celtic. So we knew he would always get on the officials, but they had such great chemistry for such a long period of time. But great for Mike Gorman, deserves all the honors he gets.
Yeah. So it was nice to have, a bunch of Celtic and Celtic related guys going to the Hall of Fame. In addition to that, the other notable NBA players who were inducted, Chris Webber, who I know you were campaigning for a couple of years, Sap. Ben Wallace gets into the Hall of Fame, and Chris Bosh also into that class, as well as Bob Dandridge in that class from a little bit of the older basketball fans will remember Bob Dandridge. But
I do.
Sap,
I do because
yes, you
he won a
do.
world championship with the Milwaukee Bucks in 1971. And I think another old-time Milwaukee Buck deserves to be in the Hall of Fame at some point. That's Marcus Johnson, who was a better pro than Bob Dandridge and a better collegian than Bob Dandridge. Hopefully my man Marcus Johnson gets in at some point. But yeah, I mean, it was an interesting class. I mean, if you look at that particular class, I think we can all make the case that Paul Pierce was the best player of those players that were inducted, right? I put Pierce
I
in the
think
power
pretty
rankings,
clearly. Yeah.
yeah, above Bosh and above Weber. You don't even think Bosh deserves to be in the Hall of Fame,
No.
but you liked his speech, which Chris Bosh to me is a fascinating guy, really smart, articulate, a deep thinker. Someone that you can obviously like. I think he belongs in there. I mean, the two championships help, but he's also a 10-time All-Star. That's nothing to sneeze at. Usually, if you're a 6 or 7-time All-Star, you get into the Hall of Fame. We know that the bar is very low to get into the Basketball Hall of Fame, so I think he's deserving there. But he is what I would call a borderline candidate, as was Weber. Pierce, obviously a slam dunk candidate, being Finals MVP in 2008 and having an illustrious career with the Celtics. He certainly deserved to be in there.
Yeah, I think that based off of the standard that they have set, then okay, yeah, Chris Webber and Chris Bosh should get in. But and I've said this many times before, and I think you agree with me, Seth, that the standard is too low to get into the Hall of Fame in basketball right now.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't put Webber or Bosh in, but they deserve to be in if you're just going to apply the same standard that they've been applying, the past 30 years to the Hall of Fame, then yeah, okay, then they get in.
Right.
They're better than some players who are currently in. So it makes sense. But I think we did this maybe as an early podcast, or I don't remember if we did this on a Herald Sap. That's, what my memory is like right now. I think I completely revamped the Hall of Fame and eliminated like half the players in there for my ideal basketball Hall of Fame.
Yeah, you have like Kareem, Magic, Bird, and Jordan, and pretty much that's it.
And Paul Pierce. Paul Pierce still gets in.
Of course, Bill Russell and John Havlicek and every other great Celtic, Bob Cousy, Tom Heinsohn, who I believe Tom Heinsohn's in there 3 different times as a player, as a coach, and I believe as a broadcaster. I'm not sure.
If he's not, he should be.
He should be, and right, yeah,
yeah.
I think he's in there 3 different occasions, which is pretty amazing. Yeah, the interesting thing about Bosh, and I'm going to use this in our endless argument of LeBron James v. Michael Jordan. You still think Jordan's the greatest player of all time. I think that LeBron is, but we both kind of agree that the other guy is the second greatest player of all time. And again, we're kind of leaving out the centers, Russell and Kareem and Wilt and all those great centers, is that LeBron was able to have a dominant team in Miami. You don't think Bosh is a Hall of Fame, and you also think that Dwyane Wade is slightly overrated. So
yes.
Does that not make LeBron's achievements in Miami seem better, even though you think he should have won 4 straight championships in Miami? If he had pulled that off with apparently a guy in Chris Bosh who doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame and another guy in Dwyane Wade who you think's overrated, then maybe you're going to come to my side of the aisle in this LeBron versus Jordan argument.
Not yet. But I mean, yeah, I mean, listen.
I'm working on it, Chet.
I still think when he was in Miami, it was the best team, overall that he had. He was obviously the best player, I think, by a country mile over Dwyane Wade and Chris Bosh. And I'm not saying that Dwyane Wade shouldn't be a Hall of Famer. He's 100% a Hall of Famer.
Oh, absolutely. He's a better player than Paul Pierce, right? We can agree on that.
I think it's close. I do think it's closer than people give it credit for. I do.
I think Dwyane Wade's a top 30 player. I think Paul Pierce is somewhere around 50 to 60. But
here's the thing, Sap. A lot of it is circumstance, right? And you could say that about anybody. Is that Dwyane Wade in the second year in his career got to play with Shaq, who was still probably in the last year of his prime, maybe a year out of his prime. And so he won an early championship and was the Finals MVP, rightfully so, that year, and was tremendous in that. But Paul Pierce played with a lot of junk for a long time. So, if Paul Pierce played early in his career with Shaq, maybe he'd have another ring or something like that too. So I don't think it's as far off as like when Pierce said he had a better career than Dwyane Wade, people were laughing. I don't think it's that ridiculous. That's my point.
I think it's ridiculous, but Paul Pierce does say a lot of ridiculous things. I know we're going to talk about that momentarily, about his exit from ESPN, et cetera. But I was glad to see Pierce get in, obviously deserving. But I was even more interested in what's going on with Pierce and Ray Allen, because it seems like maybe they're burying the hatchet, or was that just done for branding or whatever the case is? We know that Ray Allen got into the Hall of Fame a few years ago, deservedly so. So that's something that I took away from the Hall of Fame this past weekend, was maybe Pierce and Ray Allen are at least cordial.
Yeah, I think Pierce is a pretty nonchalant kind of chill guy.
Yeah.
He likes to gamble and smoke weed and hang out with strippers.
Yeah. Who
So
doesn't?
I don't think he's he's really a grudge holder. Kevin Garnett
No.
is totally a
Ooh.
grudge holder.
Ooh.
So that's going to be, obviously, I think,
Yeah.
if you're looking at the whole situation with Ray Allen, that's going to be the hardest domino to knock over. I mean, he's pretty firmly entrenched in his position. Um, you know, I don't think it was done for cameras or anything like that. I think Pierce genuinely is just fine with it at this point in his career, in his life. I don't think he wants to hold the grudge. I would think Pierce would be more upset that Ray Allen didn't come to his number retirement ceremony. I
Right.
think that's, I would be a little frustrated with that if I was Paul Pierce. Ray Allen went golfing instead. But again, this was always gonna be, Garnett is gonna have to be the one that's softened, because he's the one that is the most angry, and Rondo too. But it doesn't really matter so much what Rondo thinks, because he's not at the stature of Kevin Garnett or Paul Pierce.
And also, I kind of get the feeling Rondo would just follow Garnett, right? If Garnett let the ice break, maybe Rondo would, although Rondo is very stubborn himself. So I don't think either one of those guys are ever going to have any kind of relationship with Ray Allen. I don't even know what the relationship would be with Ray Allen and Paul Pierce. I think it is tough to snub someone when they're near you. Like, it's one thing
Definitely.
to have this grudge against someone who's 2,000 miles away. I mean,
I don't think they run in the
Paul
same
Pierce,
circles, Sap.
no,
Let's just say
no,
that.
I would say not. I mean, Paul Pierce, like you said, was playing cards with, strippers rubbing his head, smoking weed, doing whatever. He loves to do all that fun stuff. He almost feels like a kid still, where Ray Allen, we know, hasn't had a cheeseburger in 25 years,
Right.
seems to be happily married and very much in his kids' lives. And he seems like like a Boy Scout, right? Like
like Paul Pierce had I think 3 different women there for all
yeah,
his kids last night. He was thanking
yeah.
all of them individually.
It
I mean, that's fine,
his,
to each his own.
Wait, imagine if Sean Kemp could get into the Hall of Fame. I think Sean Kemp should get into the Hall of Fame just for that.
Sell
because
out
he
the
has
arena.
Absolutely. I think he has like 14 kids with 9 different wives. And maybe we get Antonio Cromartie into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and we'll have a similar vibe there. But yeah, I mean, Ray Allen and Paul Pierce have like nothing in common, right? I mean, one guy is, you almost get the feeling that Ray Allen's a little like Tom Brady. Like, he's just like focused on making sure that his body is at the very highest level. Doesn't drink alcohol, likes to golf, has his own set of ways. Paul Pierce has more of a, I don't know, Jim McMahon, Ken Stabler, Brett Favre type kind of swashbuckling mentality. So they have very little in common. But it was nice to just see that they engaged with each other at the Hall of Fame. They may never speak to each other again, or they may just bump into each other every year at the Hall of Fame if they decide to go, if a teammate's getting inducted, or if they just go every year to be part of it, like a lot of the guys do at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. There's Shannon Sharp, who's on Undisputed with Skip Bayless. He goes every year, to just kind of connect with his brothers in the Hall of Fame. And that's a pretty cool moment for those guys. So maybe every year they'll just see each other at the Hall of Fame. Garnett's in there now. So, we'll see if Garnett and Ray Allen bump into each other and what the reaction would be.
Supposedly they were sitting next to each other. I don't know if that ended up holding or what, but I don't know. I don't know that Garnett will ever soften. That just seems like his personality. I don't particularly care one way or another at this point. If Garnett wants to hold a grudge, good for him. If he doesn't, good for him. I don't really care at this point. Whatever Garnett wants to do, that's his prerogative. I'm always going to be a bigger Kevin Garnett fan than Ray Allen fan. So I'll like you said, Rondo would do. I will take Kevin Garnett's lead on the situation and see what he has to say.
Well, you're a follower, not a leader. Are you a grudge holder, though?
In the case of Kevin Garnett, yeah, I'd follow him to the ends of the earth. Absolutely.
That's good. That's
no problem doing that.
Very mature of you. But in your life, are you a grudge holder or not? Because I'm not.
Oh, big time, big time grudge holder.
I can see that. I can see that. See, I'm not. I am not. Someone would have to do something really bad to
But here's the thing,
piss me
Sap.
off that much. Again, I don't have a wife, so if someone like if I was married and someone or a friend cheated with my wife, that would be obviously, no holds
That's a
barred
deal
or
breaker.
whatever the
Yeah.
case may be. That should be a deal breaker unless you're
Right.
really passive or you just don't want your wife anymore. But it would take a lot to really piss me off to never want to speak again with people. I mean, you go times where you're kind of upset with someone, but I'm always the one that breaks the ice. I'm pretty easy going with that because it's just, and that's, a lot of members of my family don't think the same way I do. That's why they used to always kid me that I was adopted, that I'm really not part of the family, because they're more of the line of holding grudges, but I'm not that person.
Yeah, I think that I definitely am a grudge holder, but I think that I don't get in the moment. I don't get like super. I'm pretty even keel, and I've seen you
Right.
get in the moment. You'll get mad at somebody if
Oh
they annoy
yeah.
you or something
Yeah.
like that. But then
Yes.
it just like blows by. I'm
I've
sort of the same keel for most of the time, and then I'll be pissed
I
in my head, but I don't really
I got mad.
react.
I got mad at you at the Herald a few times, but that's
Sure.
me. But I always tell friends that if I ever get mad at you, take that as a compliment. That means I really love you. And
No,
I'm
the
not
first time,
trying to be
it's kind of
hokey.
scary. You're
It is
like,
kind of
oh,
scary because
geez, I've
it's
never
this
because
kind
you're
of
never
mild.
you're a very happy guy for the most part.
Yeah, except if the restaurant's closed and they're not serving meals late at night, then I really get
Yeah,
upset.
then you're the Hulk, right?
But then, right, exactly. I turn into some other monster. But then it's over with in like 5 seconds, and I'll give you a big hug and say, I'm sorry. I've thrown microphones at people. I've kind of flipped out occasionally.
Well, we did have the most frustrating producer on planet Earth for a minute.
He was the best, though. No,
He was awesome, but very
awesome, but
frustrating personality
but
sometimes.
he knew how to needle us to get us going, which was good radio. But when we were at the Herald the last 8 months we were there, we were in a really uncomfortable situation because the studio was right next to like um the main desk, like the
Right.
reception area, and like to do radio, you've got to be somewhat loud and animated. And how many times would she come knock on the glass? Can you keep it quiet? And it's like you're telling radio people to keep it quiet. It's not NPR. And then, of course, when our good bud John Saranides would show up, who could shake a building with
Right.
his voice, the whole place had to shut down. I still remember. I think you were producing the show at 1510 when it was Pete, Darwin, and John Saranides in the studio together, and I was just doing updates. I'm like, there's way too much testosterone.
Yeah,
in
a
this
lot
studio.
of testosterone there.
Oh man, a lot of firm handshakes and bear hugs, and I looked like I was like the smallest guy there. I mean, you're smaller than I am by a wide margin, but I look like a tiny guy next to those three. I mean, Pete's a big guy, Darwin's jacked up, and Saranides a big dude as well. It's almost as funny as when Villani and I ran into some of the guys over at 98.5, the Sports Hub, at the Who concert at Fenway Park a couple of years ago. You got Jimmy Stewart, who's like 6'5". I think Matt McCarthy was there. He's like 6'6". And then our good friend Joey Murr, who's gigantic. He just gave me like a giant bear hug, and I was engulfed by him. And I walked away with Villani and said, we look like jockeys next to these guys. And Villani's, small like you, a little more buff, but pretty short. And I'm like 5'9", but fairly thick. And we look like little people. And then I also mentioned to Villani, who at the time was working for EI, and the culture of WEI. I said, could you picture all the guys from EI going out to a concert at Fenway Park? He goes, I can't picture anybody EI doing anything with anybody, like, because it was a different mentality at that station, especially among the people on air. They all
the producers were cool, but the people on air, no one on air hung out with anybody else.
No,
on air
everybody hated
afterwards.
each other, and that was that's when you had Minahan and Callahan feuding with the midday show, and then you had that I don't know if that's manufactured or not. I think it's real at that station. It's real. Whereas at the Sports Hub, it seems like they all kind of get along. I mean, they can needle each other, Toucher and Rich will needle Felger and Maz, and that's all well and good. That's kind of fun, but I don't think they dislike each other. I don't think they hang out together, but I don't think there's any hatred there. The guys at EEI back 2-3 years ago, there was like incredible hatred. And even before that, when Mike Salk was in after he replaced Glenn Ordway, everybody hated him. So, we've turned this into like a radio insider.
That seems to be a trend, though. Okay. With him, wherever he goes. So I think that was more of a Mike Salk problem.
And he's not talented enough to put up with that bullshit. If someone is really good at the best at what they do, like if Colin Cowherd is a prick, which I heard he's not, if anything, he's a great guy to work with, then you put up with it because I think he's the best in the business. But if you're Mike Salk and you're on AM radio in Seattle, I guess you're the biggest thing in Seattle. That's all well and good. But if you're an asshole and no one likes you, probably not worth putting up with.
Yeah, I agree. All right, so we'll switch gears back to the Hall of Fame, Sap. Did you listen to all the speeches?
No, I didn't really, because I was watching a lot of college football. I'm trying to get into that this year, and I was rooting for your Oregon Ducks
Thank
to
you.
pull
Big
the
win for
upset
me.
against the Ohio State Buckeyes. I was rooting for them, and as you know, with Aaron Rodgers looking like he's got one foot out the door, I'm recruiting my next quarterback in the NFL, and right now the leader is Justin Herbert of the LA Chargers, who went to Oregon. So I'm going to be rooting for the Ducks.
Picked up a win for himself on Sunday. He did.
Yes,
Justin Herbert in the Chargers. So
it's
a good
I
choice.
tweeted out something that I think you agree with, that in 10 years we will say Justin Herbert greater career than Josh Allen. I feel really confident.
I've never been high.
You've
on
never
Josh
liked Josh Allen.
No.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I think he's got a lot of tremendous skills, and he's tough, and he's actually a smart kid. I think he had a very high Wonderlic score, but Justin Herbert was
smart enough to get vaccinated, Sap.
That's right. Well, I think he is now. Finally, whereas we know Justin Herbert was pre-med. Had a 4.2 grade point average.
Academic All-American.
I mean, I love him, and he's a great profile in ESPN, the magazine, on Justin Herbert, and it's kind of bizarre that I'm picking him as my next quarterback once Rodgers retires, which maybe in 3 weeks for all we know.
Tomorrow.
But they're complete opposites. Like Rodgers is a brand. Rodgers, I think, is the most interesting guy in the NFL, right? Whereas Justin Herbert's like this chill dude who doesn't even want to talk about himself. It's like I went from probably the biggest a-hole in the league, but that's why I like him, because he's interesting, to a kind of a chill kid from the West Coast. So, it's no different than if you leave your wife. Sometimes you go for someone completely different. You go from the brunette to the blonde.
Yeah,
that's what happens.
That's fine. Your tastes change and evolve. That makes sense. So I watch college football too, but I also managed to sneak in watching all the Hall of Fame speeches. Sap, they put them right up on YouTube. Make it easy for you.
You have much better technical skills than I have, and
that's true.
You have better.
I also have a computer, and you do not.
Yes, I have my iPhone. I have a TV, but see, again, I don't pay for cable, so I am at the mercy of whatever cable service I have here. I don't want to rock the boat. I have a good deal where I live. I don't want to go to the landlord and push it, because he may say you can go retire with Aaron Rodgers if you'd like. So I just don't. I have to get certain things set up. I will soon. I don't even have Netflix. I feel embarrassed to say that. But the thing is that, when I was with the Herald, the only two things I was doing on radio were sports and politics. So I was kind of consumed with those two things. I do have to branch out a little bit more, but I got a good idea of what the speeches were all about. Pierce talking about some funny stories when Doc Rivers was his coach at the time. We showed up to practice with a hangover, and Doc finally said, just go home and play well tonight. And I thought that was a funny story. But you were really impressed with Bosh, which I like, because Bosh is a very, very introspective, smart guy.
Yeah, I thought so. Of the main guys, that I was intrigued by getting into the Hall of Fame, not trying to slight anybody, but I listened to Ben Wallace, Paul Pierce, Chris Webber, and Chris Bosh. I listened to all of those guys' speeches, and Bill Russell did a really quick 2-minute, if it was even 2 minutes. That he was there, but he did a pre-recorded one. He's an elderly man now, so he's not going to stand up there and pontificate for a while. Pierce's speech was kind of what you would expect. It was a lot of thank yous throughout his career, to his brothers, his moms, who raised him as a single parent. His dad is still alive, and his dad has never reached out to him. He has no interest. Pierce has no interest in, even after he got stabbed. He knows who his dad is, and the dad knows him, but there's no connection there. So he thanked, his mom and there was a police officer, he said, in his community in Inglewood growing up, who really kept the kids out of trouble. And he said would open the gym for him at 6 a.m. to practice. So, he thanked him, high school coaches, college coaches. Roy Williams was actually his college coach at Kansas. And then, he thanked the Celtics organization a lot. And so it was a lot of mostly thank yous, a couple of funny, like you said, anecdotes, and then he was able to recite from memory the teams that passed on him in the draft and thank them, which was a cool bit. But it was a pretty standard as far as Hall of Fame speeches go. Chris Webber's was a little bit more emotional. He thanked his parents a lot. His parents both, his mom was getting a master's while raising him. His dad worked in a factory in Michigan all day long. I didn't realize Chris Webber had such a close relationship with Isaiah Thomas. Growing up, Chris Webber again grew up rough in Detroit. All these guys, by the way, grew up not in the greatest set of circumstances. So they all deserve a lot of credit for being able to work their way into success. I mean, that's the thing. And just, Sap, a lot of people, especially more conservative people or racist people, will say, these guys are all overpaid divas, whatever. And okay, maybe you can make the case they're overpaid, but, that's the market rate. So that's what they get. But, these guys all earned it. I mean, they did not grow up wealthy. There's very few players in the NBA who grew up with money. And a lot of them grew up with not any money, really living hand to mouth. And
single parent household, right? With the mom working 3 jobs, or like you said, with Chris Webber, the mom getting a master's degree, the dad working in a factory. I mean, it's not all the players grew up, in the worst situation. Like Magic Johnson had a pretty good middle class upbringing. Michael Jordan did as well. So, you had that. Larry Bird, a white guy, had one of the worst upbringings. I think he witnessed or his dad committed suicide.
Yeah,
I mean, like that's just mind blowing. And his mom had to raise this big family as a waitress, which is not a politically correct term anymore, but back in the day, that's what she was called. So I think that, there's so many different people coming from this. We know you like boxing a lot more than I do. I do appreciate boxing, but most, if not all, the boxers come from like impoverished backgrounds. Like you're generally not going to have kids
don't get
going
into
to
boxing
school,
if you have another option.
If you're going to Exeter, you're not generally going to go join the boxing club, whereas that's an option for poor people, their way to get out of the situation they're in. So it was pretty interesting.
I do hate, Sap, that when people say, oh, these guys are entitled and stuff. Well, because half their lives a lot of them spent extremely impoverished, and they all talked about that. Paul Pierce grew up in Inglewood in the late 80s and early 90s. I mean, go Google what that was like. That wasn't a great neighborhood to be in. Chris Bosh was talking about growing up in Texas, in a place, his high school gym didn't have air conditioning. He said it would get, 120 degrees in the summer. These guys are not entitled. They've earned it. No. So that pisses me off when people say that. But again, going back to the speeches, I was saying about Chris Webber, I didn't realize how close a relationship he had with Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas, I think, Chris Webber was a big time recruit. He may have been the number 1 recruit in the country. And while Isaiah Thomas was playing for the Pistons, Chris Webber was coming up through high school ranks and was becoming, a big star. Where's he going to go? Obviously, eventually he went to Michigan. But Chris Webber said that Isaiah Thomas went to his house and was like, do not let, anything you need financially, emotionally, whatever, I got you. Do not let people take advantage of you right now. And Chris Webber was breaking down crying, talking about it. Isaiah Thomas, I'm not a big Isaiah Thomas fan because, I'm a Celtics fan, but I do think he gets a bad rep for some stuff like that.
Oh, sure.
He's never talked about it. I've never heard that story before. And he didn't get anything out of it other than being protective of a young man at the time who people were probably trying to take advantage of. So I think Isaiah Thomas deserves a lot of credit for being a mentor in that situation, that he, was a multimillionaire, worldwide famous basketball player going into a poor kid's house who was in high school and saying, I will take care of you. Don't worry about it.
Yep. I think if you want to know about Isaiah Thomas, and look, it's very complicated. The whole legend of Isaiah Thomas is very complicated. First of all, if you are Michael Jordan's sworn enemy, people aren't going to like you, right? I mean, Michael Jordan is still the most popular athlete in the country. I don't care about Tom Brady, Patrick Mahomes, LeBron James, Aaron Rodgers, pick whoever, Vladimir Guerrero Jr., which I'm just going to throw out there because he's having an incredible season. But you get my point. Michael Jordan is still the most popular athlete in this country, and he hasn't touched a basketball competitively since 2003. That says volumes of the aura of Michael Jordan, right? So Isaiah Thomas is one guy who Jordan despises, although
he made his shit list for whatever reason.
And once you're on Jordan's shit list, talk about Kevin Garnett holding a grudge. Kevin Garnett would say Michael Jordan's insane. So but just if you've ever heard any of his teammates from the Pistons talk about him, they love him. I mean, that team that won back-to-back titles, and again, that was with the Lakers and Celtics being dominant and the Bulls being really good on the precipice of winning 6 titles in 8 years. And in the middle of all that came the Detroit Pistons. Their best player was Isaiah Thomas. Their second best player was Joe Dumars, who's not a top 50 player. Their third best player was Dennis Rodman, who was kind of a niche player, right? A niche player.
Yeah.
Is that the right way to say
rebounding.
that word? Defensive and rebounding. Yeah, he can score, whatever. That's it. And he was the guy, and those teammates love him. Like those guys would kill for him. He was the Pied Piper on those Pistons teams. So I think that, with the exception, of course, of Adrian Dantley, who got traded for Mark Aguirre because Isaiah didn't like Adrian Dantley, and Dantley and Isaiah, I'm sure, have a horrible relationship, if any. So, yeah, Isaiah is one of the most complicated guys in the league. And I remember going in there in the 80s, Jet, covering the teams, because the Pistons were in, 3 times during the regular season and playing the Celtics all the time in the postseason. He was one of the strangest guys to talk to. There were times where he was the best interview in the league. Engaging, charismatic, articulate, smart, thoughtful, just everything. He was great. The next time he'd go back, he was the most miserable, prick you could talk to.
So what, do you think he's
so
bipolar?
I don't know. Maybe that's something I'm not, equipped to answer that. But maybe, again, we're talking about 35 years ago. So it's not like today where an athlete, it feels more free to talk about that and maybe deal with it better than athletes did in the 80s, right? So
I think it's interesting, though, Sep, that there's no real middle ground with how people feel about him. Players specifically,
no.
They either
I
love
him
him or they
hate
hate him.
As a player, I think he's. If I was to do, and maybe we'll do this in a future podcast, like the all underrated team in the history of the league, it would be Moses Malone at center and Elgin Baylor at one of the forwards, and I think Isaiah Thomas would be the point guard, because it's like I think he's still the third greatest point guard in the history of the sport, behind Magic. And if we're going to call Oscar a point guard, then I think it goes Isaiah. Maybe I'll put Curry above Isaiah now, but they're not really similar players.
No,
Isaiah is a pure point guard.
I remember
he's Chris Paul, except better. He's what Chris Paul aspires to be.
Right. I talked to my dad about, Isaiah Thomas, a couple times when Chris Paul was in the finals, people were saying, Chris Paul could potentially overtake Isaiah Thomas. And my dad said, Chris Paul wishes it was Isaiah Thomas.
No, Isaiah Thomas was pound for pound the best player in basketball for a decade. Now, as great as Allen Iverson was, Isaiah Thomas could have done that if that's what was needed. Like, if you needed Isaiah to go out and score 35 a night, he could have done that, blindfolded.
But doesn't it seem, Sap, like players either their relationship with him is either they love him or they hate him?
Oh, he
there's no lukewarm.
No, not at all. Like, you don't get that from Magic Johnson. Like, Magic Johnson, like, everybody loves Magic Johnson, right? Bird, everybody loves and respects him. And Michael, no one says anything bad about him because they fear him. But with Isaiah, you're right. His teammates loved him. I think his opponents respected the hell out of him, but a lot of them didn't like him. I mean, even Larry Bird, I remember after a playoff game 7 against the Pistons, where the Celtics won a really hard-fought series, went on to go to the finals to play the Lakers. And Dennis Rodman said if Larry Bird had been, a black guy, he'd be just average. And Isaiah Thomas kind of backed them up on that, but he did it with a laugh. And Isaiah had to apologize and say, well, if you know me, I have my sense of humor. I was just kidding. It was botched. The whole thing was botched by Isaiah Thomas in the league. And Bird was great because Bird, just stayed above the fray. He didn't throw Isaiah under the bus. I don't know if they ever really had a relationship after that. But Bird respected the hell out of him. Again, this is the only guy I can think of that has a winning playoff record against Bird and the Celtics, Magic and the Lakers, and Michael and the Bulls. That's not a coincidence. So that's quite an accomplishment. So, but you're dead on, Jet. There's people that swear by him personally as a player, and there's people that hate him. And again, don't forget, he was a disaster as head coach of the Knicks. He was running a amateur basketball league, right, or a minor league basketball league, which didn't work out. So he's had a lot of ups and downs and misses, and there's a guy who you could really do a pretty good job of making a movie about his life. I mean, talk about growing up impoverished in Chicago and then going to Indiana for 2 years with Bobby Knight. I mean, and then there's a guy that's a fascinating story as much as anyone's.
Yeah, and I found it interesting, that story again with Chris Webber, and Chris Webber was as emotional talking about Isaiah
Yeah,
Thomas as he was talking about his parents. So,
right.
it
Yeah,
goes to
that's
show you what he
pretty
meant
interesting.
to Chris
And
Webber.
who was there for Garnett? Isaiah Thomas, right?
Yep.
Isaiah
Yeah.
Thomas was there for Kevin Garnett. So, like you said, I think the people that love him, like, will go to war for him, will go to the final death to support him, and then the others won't. And I think partly because he played for Bobby Knight, and a lot of people have the same reaction to Bobby Knight. I know Bobby Knight at this point's kind of lost his mind. He's up there,
Yeah.
campaigning for Trump and saying that, much like Harry Truman, Trump would drop the bomb to end the war, which even Trump was like, please don't say that. But but Bobby Knight's also a polarizing guy. Guys that played for him swear by him, including Isaiah Thomas. They look at him as like a father figure. Like, this is the guy who was there for me as a father. When you're playing for him, very tough. Like, you don't want to deal with that. But as you grow older, you realize that tough minded love is what you need. I mean, I always say this. I had a sixth grade teacher, Mr. Holmesy, who, when we first started sixth grade, I was like, this guy is really a badass. He's tough. But years later, he was, to this day, the greatest teacher I ever had, because in our school system, it was kindergarten through six, and then you went 7, 8, 9, and then you went to high school, 10, 11, 12. Sixth grade is where they started to treat you like somewhat of an adult, because now
Right.
you're going to junior high where there's more freedoms. And he was tough. He was like a drill instructor. I think some of his methods would not work today. I mean, he was not afraid to take the kid up against the wall and stick his finger in your chest. But this was like 1974, so no one said anything, and that's the kind of discipline that they would fork out. But he's the best teacher I ever had, and I think that's what you see with Bobby Knight. And I think Isaiah Thomas is, get kind of that aura that he learned maybe from Bobby Knight. Maybe I'm getting too complicated with it, but you get my point in saying that these are complicated people, whether it's Isaiah Thomas or Bobby Knight or my sixth grade teacher, Mr. Holmesy.
Right. all in the same category.
All very complicated.
The last thing I want to say about Chris Webber's speech before I move on to the speech I thought was the best in Chris Bosh's was that, Chris Webber did spend a little bit of time in his speech talking about the importance of the Fab Five in Michigan,
Mm-hmm.
and how proud he was to be a Michigan Wolverine. And that relationship has completely changed in the past couple of years, because there were some improper benefit allegations and stuff against Chris Webber, and Michigan was completely disassociated themselves with him. He didn't seem to have a good relationship with the rest of the guys in the Fab Five, like, by his choice. I think the rest of them were like, let's, why Chris Webber, are you not involved with us anymore? I remember Jalen Rose talking about it, saying how much it hurt him that Chris Webber was. And now that seems to be completely repaired. I guess time does heal all wounds, but it is interesting now that he has a good relationship with the University of Michigan. I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the fact that Juwan Howard's the head coach of their basketball team now, and said, if you want me as the head coach, repair your relationship with the guy who's my teammate. In addition to, again, I think that the timeout thing was interesting, Sap. And I know there's just an article about this, about the timeout play. And he said, Weber was saying, it's the best and worst thing that's ever happened to him.
Yep.
In talking about, again, the national championship game, if you're unaware or just, peripherally aware, Chris Webber obviously called a timeout that the team didn't have. They go on to lose the game in the national championship. And that's all the game is remembered for, is Chris Webber calling an extra timeout. But he said, it helped him define him in terms of, he could have just crumbled there, but he went on to have obviously a Hall of Fame career. Sap, I wasn't watching that game at the time because I was really young. Sort of, you're just curious about your thoughts about it all these years later and what Weber's had to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was 1993, so I'm 30, and I'm sure I bet Michigan in that game, so I was pissed off because I thought they were going to beat North Carolina. Not really one of the best North Carolina teams. I think Eric Montrose was on that team for North Carolina.
Former Celtic.
Eventually ended up former Celtic. Yeah, the crew cut and all that stuff. And Michigan should have won the game. I mean, you had Chris Webber, Juwan Howard, and Jalen Rose, but they just couldn't quite put North Carolina away. And then he traveled before he called the timeout, which he didn't have. It should have been a traveling violation, and then it led to the technical, and North Carolina was able to put the game away. That would have been a last shot opportunity for Michigan, so we're not saying they would have necessarily won that game, but because he became a big star, he was the first pick in the draft, right? Originally drafted by Orlando.
Yeah.
They were going to play him alongside Shaq, which would have been interesting, and then they traded him to Golden State for Penny Hardaway, who Golden State had drafted. So, I think it was Fred Brown in the 82 game turned the ball over after North Carolina had just gone ahead with the Jordan jumper in the 82 finals. Fred Brown turned it over to James Worthy, and Worthy sank one of two free throws, and North Carolina won that championship. No one talks about that. And that's actually, as egregious an error as Chris Webber made, but Chris Webber is a star. Fred Brown was a role player at Georgetown. So, and he went on and had a great career. But yeah, the one faux pas that you could compare it to is maybe Russell Wilson throwing the interception against the Patriots in the Super Bowl.
Sure.
Right, where it's like,
but that gets
now
more on the coach than anything. I feel
it
like
does.
More
it
people
does.
talk
Yeah,
about Pete Carroll
right.
not running the ball there.
Right.
And
maybe this falls into Steve Fisher, who's the coach of Michigan. Did he, again, we're talking college kids, right?
Right.
Did during the timeout, did he tell his guys, because it was a timeout shortly before that, we have no timeouts, like that's where, like, a lot of times Chuck Daly, who was the head coach of the Pistons, would look and say that the worst NBA coach is better than the best college coach in terms of in-game coaching in a situation. He said, in fact, my trainer is probably better equipped to handle game situations than a college coach. It's just because of our training. And, you have to have that stuff buttoned up coming out of the huddle. There were reports that he was over near the bench when he had the ball and they were signaling timeout. So he's, it's a panic situation in that situation. But yeah, I mean, the Russell Wilson one, yeah, more that falls onto Pete Carroll than does Russell Wilson. And the one thing is Russell Wilson had just won the Super Bowl the year before.
Right.
So, Michigan went to 2 championship games and lost both of them. Now, the first time they went as freshmen, they got absolutely destroyed by Duke, which that was not a surprise. Duke
Grant
was
Hill.
a wagon. Yeah. Well, Christian Laettner, Grant Hill. Yeah. I mean, that team was like loaded. The next time they went was against North Carolina. They were better than them and they just didn't finish it. So I think that was something that he had to live with his entire life, but he seems to have recovered from it because he's done quite well for himself. I think he's involved in the music industry. He's done
and he
TV
does the
work.
TNT. He's good.
He does
he's TNT.
Yeah, I think he's good. He's got a great personality. Always liked him as a player because I always like players that you could do so many things. Like Chris Webber was not a great shooter, but he could score, but he was an outstanding rebounder, really good passer, had phenomenal hands. Like, he's one of those guys that if he had played with great playmakers, that he would have benefited even more because he had fabulous hands. He probably should have been. There's 2 players that I always thought were probably more talented than Karl Malone that didn't have the careers that Karl Malone had. One was Derek Coleman, who played at Syracuse, was drafted by the Nets, and the other was Chris Webber.
The Coleman thing was he got too heavy in the NBA.
And he also had the worst attitude. Like, whereas Webber, I think, was a pretty good guy and a pretty good teammate. But Coleman seemed like he was just on his own planet. Whereas Karl Malone, who may not have been as talented as those guys, did have the best work ethic maybe of any player we've ever seen. So, Webber could have had a better career, came close to winning a championship in 2002, right? Lost in game 7 to the Lakers. A lot of people think there was some shenanigans going on with the officiating.
Right.
If they win that Western Conference final, they go on and play the Nets in the finals.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Sacramento wins that, so his legacy could have changed very easily if Michigan wins that national championship over North Carolina in 93 and then wins the NBA championship in 2002. He would have been in the Hall of Fame like a decade ago or whatever.
No doubt. No doubt.
I mean, because he was a fringe candidate, but I always thought he belonged in there because, top 5 MVP.
Being the best player on a championship team gets you in. Period. It gets you in. If you're the best player on a championship team.
And it would have been college and pro. He also, I think he belonged. But that would have got him in earlier. So I was glad to see him get in.
Yeah, he hasn't talked about that timeout. He didn't want to talk about it for years and years and years. So it was interesting to hear what he had to say about. He didn't talk about it in the speech, but this was an interview, prior to the induction. Yeah. So it was interesting to hear that. Ben Wallace had a shorter speech. It was basically a spoken word poem. It was interesting. Not my cup of tea, but I know it resonated with a lot of people. Ben Wallace has an extremely, the deepest voice I've ever heard in my life. It's a booming, deep voice. So he's a very powerful speaker. And then, the speech of the night I thought was Chris Bosh, who, again, to me, not a Hall of Famer, but by the standard they set up, okay. He's just a really good public speaker. And you saw that,
He
I think,
is.
early in his career when he was doing those campaign videos to get into the All-Star game when he was with the
Mhm.
Raptors.
Those are great.
He's just he's a smart guy who's well spoken. You can be a smart guy and not be well spoken. He happens to be
Mhm.
both. Um,
Speaking
and
of great pipes too, right? He's got a great voice as well.
he
Very
does have a
deep
great
voice.
voice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see him actually do some more TV work. I think he'd be really good at that.
I
And,
think
he
he's going to be
talked about
fantastic. Yep.
his career and how hard it was to have it cut short because of the blood clots in his heart.
Mhm.
And talked about growing up in Texas and playing in the heat and work in that massive Texas heat and working and working and working to be the best, and how he was kind of remembered a lot. He cried a lot. He cried when he lost the finals. He cried. He said in games in high school, and he said, uh, I that's just who he is. He wears his heart on his sleeve. I
Mhm.
thought it was just a really good speech, a well thought out speech. It wasn't the cookie cutter. Thank you to this person. Thank you to that person. I don't even think he thanked anybody outside of his family. He didn't. LeBron was there. Dwyane Wade was there. He didn't mention them. He did thank Pat Riley,
Mhm.
and Pat Riley and Ray Allen were the guys who inducted him. But that was at the very beginning. But it was just a really good speech from a really good speaker. And I think it shows you the difference between somebody who's a really good public speaker and not nervous to public speak and kind of is going to put their own spin on the speech versus Paul Pierce is a okay public speaker, but his was a pretty standard thank you to this person, that person
Right.
going through his career, which is fine. I think you want to thank the people who got you there, but I was just more interested in what Chris Bosh had to say because it wasn't thank you to this person. This is what happened
Right.
in my high school career. This is what he made it into more of a story. And I think I think he's probably a more talented speaker than he was a player, and he was a damn good player.
Yeah, and I think he has a career in broadcasting, something we don't know if Paul Pierce has anymore, although there's so many different ways you can reinvent yourself in broadcasting. And we know that Paul Pierce was doing stuff on ESPN, but no longer after his video, which had him with strippers and smoking marijuana and playing cards. What of those events, which was the straw that broke the camel's back? I'm thinking
Probably
it's
the strippers.
the strippers. Yeah, I mean the marijuana that's legal in California, right? So I like that they can't go there with that. It's the NBA. Like you
Right.
can't push that agenda. Gambling is legal in most states. But yeah, the strippers may have been a problem. Now Paul Pierce is, no longer working at
Didn't seem to
ESPN.
care. He didn't seem to care that much losing that job. I don't
He's
think it
he
affected him.
sh- I don't think he ever was really into it, right? Because look, I thought he was just okay on that. I think he wanted to be Barkley or Shaq, but there's only one Barkley and there's only one
Right.
Shaq. Their presence is humongous, literally and figuratively. Whereas Pierce, who wasn't the player those guys were, also doesn't have the personality like those guys. But he also didn't bring you like in-depth stuff the way maybe Jay Williams or Jalen Rose does. And then Jalen Rose is so comfortable talking about social issues, which Paul Pierce doesn't get into. So like, well, what
Right.
what was
Well,
Paul Pierce going
Pierce,
to bring to that other than
his
I
hot
won a
takes were
championship? I
all
hate
about
LeBron.
himself. So that's
About himself, I'm better
yeah.
than Dwyane Wade, and I hate LeBron. Pretty much saying it without saying it. And that's I know we were going to talk about this story that Chris Mannix put out in Sports Illustrated about Pierce, how he got tired of ESPN because all they wanted to talk about was LeBron. Well, okay, that sounds all well and good, except TV's in the business to get people to watch,
Yeah.
not to just talk about what you want to talk about. Look, how often do we talk about LeBron on this podcast? Yes,
Every
I'm
time.
his
Yeah.
biggest fan. I get that. You don't like him, but that makes good podcasting. I guess I was going to say good radio, but we can go back and forth on that. But he's the biggest star in the league. Like if you watch all the shows in the morning, whether it's First Take or Undisputed, Coward on Fox Sports 1, or go to Get Up and the Stephen A. Smith show, which they should just name it that now because it's got a revolving cast of characters. But it's generally, what do they talk about in the NFL? Brady,
Yep.
Rodgers, Mahomes, the Dallas Cowboys. What do they talk about in the NBA? LeBron, Durant, Steph Curry. There
Yeah.
you go. That's what
Stars
people want to
sell.
hear.
Yeah.
So,
Sure.
so I think Paul Pierce should understand that. I know we have to talk about him because he's still the biggest star, and he just has some sort of thing with LeBron. Obviously, they've had a lot of battles. maybe just holds it against LeBron that Ray Allen left the Celtics to go to Miami. I mean, do you think the feud started before that? I'm sure it did, but it got heightened once Ray Allen left the Celtics to go to Miami and they won a championship together. I like it's tough to get my head around that.
I think LeBron rankles some of the older players, the players that came before him. I just don't think they like the anointment and all the constant coverage about him. I think to Pierce, his guy is Jordan, and I don't think that they appreciate any of the comparisons. They don't like it. I just don't think he likes the guy, which is fine. And Pierce, like you said, was okay on TV, nothing special. So it's just I think that was his post career path. And he seems to be happy now doing, he's doing a marijuana business. He's going to all these boxing events and fights. He seems perfectly happy. So I don't feel bad for him because he seems to be happy with his situation now. I am curious to ask you this, Sepp, and maybe this is the last thing we talk about for this, is that, again, Chris Bosh didn't specifically thank LeBron James or Dwyane Wade in his speech. He was always thought of as sort of the odd man out in that Heat team. Do you think that he's not super close with those guys? We know LeBron and Wade are close.
LeBron and Wade are very, very close. Yeah. Well, again,
do you think Bosh liked those guys?
I think he did. I think
he felt alienated.
Well, he's George Harrison, right? LeBron's John Lennon and Dwyane Wade's Paul McCartney, whatever. I'm sorry for the old reference. But it is the greatest. I think
everybody
band
understands
ever, so why not?
that one. Yeah.
Everybody knows the Beatles. That the Beatles. There's certain things like you can always throw out there, and the Beatles are one of them. Everybody kind of gets it. But and it was a tough situation for Bosh because the third guy with LeBron is always difficult, right? We saw that in Cleveland with Kevin Love. Unfortunately, his first 7 years in Cleveland, he never had a third guy or a second guy. So he had to kind of learn how to play with those other great players like Wade and Bosh. I think Bosh and Wade are probably close, because they can have the thing in common where they can kind of talk about LeBron. Like it's almost like Seinfeld, when Elaine and George got together, the only thing they could talk about where they felt comfortable was talking about Jerry. So I think maybe Wade and Bosh get together and they talk about LeBron because LeBron's still the alpha, still the star.
Yeah, but at the same time, Sepp, I do feel like Wade is, he lives this Hollywood lifestyle. His
he
wife
sure
is
does.
A beautiful, famous actress. He's big into the fashion stuff too. His son is an NBA prospect. He's a huge figure. LeBron obviously is LeBron. He's one of the most famous people on the planet. So I don't know that Chris Bosh feels like he has that much in common with those guys anymore.
Do you get the feeling too that, and that those are great points, but kind of like the Celtics big three, Garnett and Pierce were close, and Ray Allen was always kind of the alien.
Yes.
Even when they were playing together, he was the outsider. And I think part of it, you can go back to the fact that of the three guys, Ray Allen grew up in a middle-class background, if not upper middle class, right? Both of his parents were educators. I believe his mom or dad was the school principal. And grew up in kind of a military background, right?
I believe his dad was in the military. He did grow up on military bases.
Yeah. So it's different mentality than, like you said, Paul Pierce never had a relationship with his dad. I don't know what Garnett's situation was, but I don't think he grew up rich
poor
or even middle class. He grew up
South
country
Carolina.
Poor.
Yeah.
Right. So Ray Allen was like the alien, so I think Chris Bosh, in a sense, was kind of the outsider with those three. But if he doesn't go to Miami and win 2 championships, maybe he's not giving that speech last week.
No, he's not. I don't think
he's not. He stays in Toronto and makes 8 All-Star appearances. We go, yeah, Chris Bosh is, really nice player. Is he really DeMar DeRozan at that point, right? I mean, but he goes to Miami and wins 2 championships. That puts him over the top as a Hall of Famer. So, you kind of have to look at it that way. I do think that I think that he's not much. Well, every player or ex-player is into branding, but not like LeBron and Dwyane Wade. I mean, Dwyane Wade has now a show on TNT, The Cube, which I haven't watched.
Yeah,
but it's on. I mean, yeah, he's married to a beautiful woman. Like you said, his son is a pro prospect. He owns 1 or 2% of the Utah Jazz. Dwyane Wade's a star. LeBron's a superstar in terms of not just on the court, but off the court. Then you get Chris Bosh, who seems like a guy from Texas who's pretty chill about everything. And
I would venture to guess when he was on the Heat, he was probably hanging out with the other guys on the Heat.
Yeah, I would maybe with I don't know. LeBron, I'm sure, was hanging out with Wade because
Yeah.
because I think Wade was trying to teach LeBron how to be a leader. So there was that they were almost like brothers, right? Like Dwyane Wade being the big brother, LeBron being the younger brother. Do you think that name any other guys on the Heat that he was hanging around? I'm sure. I don't think he was the third wheel with those guys. I think he kind of was independent. But I always get the feeling that Bosh is really a deep thinker
Yeah, I
and
think he
he's
is.
okay with that. Though he's kind of almost got a little bit of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in him, like he's a very deep thinker. And you know, oftentimes when a guy's a deep thinker, he likes to be alone. Like he doesn't need to be around other people. LeBron is much more of a social butterfly. LeBron is the alpha. He's the guy that
Yeah, I'm
will
just sort of
get
like,
team events ready. I think it's a great point you're pointing out that maybe they weren't that close. They came to honor him because that's what you do, but
right.
he didn't have to go out and thank them because he's a Hall of Famer.
Right. I do wonder, and especially when, LeBron retires, whenever the hell that's going to be, and more stuff comes out about his NBA career. Like, was he close to a lot of teammates other than the star level players? Like, how do people, his teammates, feel about him? I know some guys, again, like we were talking about Isaiah Thomas a little while ago, swear by him. I would venture to guess he kind of rankled a lot of people too.
Sure. Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, Jordan punched Steve Kerr.
Yeah, but
We
everybody's
saw
afraid of him. I don't think anybody's
everybody was
afraid
just
of LeBron.
no, everybody is afraid of Jordan. He's like a psycho. I mean, it's
Right.
he's a sociopath. I think a lot of Kobe's teammates were frightened of
Right. You
him.
cannot like somebody because they're a dick. I don't think LeBron's a
Right.
dick.
No, no,
I'm
no.
just saying. I
But
think
they
that
may
there's
think
reason I think
yeah.
he's annoying to some
I
people. I
think
think
people
he
may think
annoys
he's
them.
phony. They may
Right.
think he's phony, or they think that he gets preferential treatment. Which you know what, they all have to get over that because that's the way it is in sports. Sorry, that's just the way it is. If the Patriots had figured that out, maybe Tom Brady would be winning football games in Foxborough rather than Tampa. There's certain guys that have accomplished a lot that you kind of have to give a little bit more leeway. So I get that, but yeah, it could be. And again, we know when the team loses, it's everyone else's fault. When the team wins, it's LeBron's accomplishment. Although there's enough media out there that will blame him for everything. I mean, LeBron can average
Sure.
a triple double in the finals and still get blamed for the Cavaliers losing to Golden State, even though they had no prayer in hell of beating that team. But yeah, I think there's probably teammates that roll their eyes. And we know Kyrie never bought into what LeBron was selling. We get that. But I think Kevin Love is someone who had a pretty good relationship with LeBron by all accounts. But it's probably like any other workplace where, you can respect the guy, but doesn't mean you want to be friends with them. Like Bird
Right.
and McHale didn't really have a great relationship off the court. On the court, they were magical together because they knew where they were. Like Bird was the guy, McHale was the number 2 guy, or Parrish was the number 2 guy, and they understood that. But doesn't necessarily mean that Bird was best friends with McHale. McHale, I think, was much friendlier with Danny Ainge, when they were
Right.
players.
Now everybody seemed to love Danny Ainge as a player. He was
Danny
fun.
Ainge was the younger brother. He was the youngest brother.
Right.
That's on that team. He was the kid brother that and Maxwell was the clown and cracked everyone up, and McHale was kind of the prankster, and Dennis Johnson and Robert Parrish were more the sage veterans, and Bird was just the best player. So
Right.
yeah, that was a nice dynamic that you had there. Was the Lakers at that time had a weird dynamic because you had Kareem and Magic, who have nothing in common, like other than both being great basketball players, but it worked.
Yeah, I think though the thing is, if we're talking about LeBron and Jordan, and this is going to be a whole nother podcast, obviously, is that I don't think Jordan gave a damn if anybody liked him at all. I think LeBron wants
Yep.
everybody to like him.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And
Remember
that,
when he
to me, is
first,
the most
yeah,
stark difference of their personalities.
absolutely. Oh yeah, no, it's black swan, white swan. When LeBron went to Miami, remember there was a point where he was, the villain. He was
Yeah.
never comfortable with that. No, LeBron's a uniter. LeBron's similar to Magic. How many times have we said that? Not just on the court, but off the court. They're kind of uniters, great personality. They want to. LeBron was the guy that always had the families or the players to his mom's house for holidays.
Right. But when
I
you
don't think
want
Jordan
everybody
ever
to like,
did that.
no,
Well,
when you
that's
want
what you
everybody to
want.
like you, Sap, there
You
is
do
a
stuff like that.
tendency
Yeah.
to come off as phony or to be phony
Yep.
because you're
No, I get
trying
you.
to be a chameleon and play to what,
Yep.
this person likes this. I'm going to say I like this too.
Yeah.
And some people really don't like that. Jordan at least was honest. It was
Yeah, he's
honestly, I think so. I do think even though he was being aggressive or a dick, whatever you want to call it, I do think at least people will respect it. Like he's not changing his personality for me.
right.
This is who he is. Like I can at least get on board with that. If LeBron's talking to one guy in the locker, oh yeah, I love country music. Another guy in the
Right.
locker room,
Yeah.
I really love rap music. That's my favorite. I think some people go like, what is this guy doing? I get
Yeah.
who is
A
he?
chameleon. You're right. He's a chameleon. It's like, I don't know who LeBron's favorite football team is anymore, right? It used to be the Cowboys, then it's the Browns. Now apparently he likes the Rams. I know he loves Aaron Rodgers. He's like, there's all these different guys out there, and he obviously loves and respects Brady. It's like,
Right, I saw him with
whereas
the Cleveland Indians hat. He owns part of the Red Sox. He's worn a
Yankees, yeah,
Yankees hat. He's all
yeah.
over the place.
And now he's a Dodger fan. So like, yeah, he's it's almost like, let me put it this way. It's similar to Hillary Clinton. And that was a big turnoff with Hillary Clinton because she'd be in one part of the country trying to talk with that accent. And it just didn't
Right.
come across right. Just be yourself. That's the suggestion I make to everybody in everyday life, or even to young broadcasters. Just be who you are. Don't try to be the next Colin Cowherd or the next Glenn Wardway. Just be who you are, and you'll be more comfortable that way, and people will appreciate the authenticity of that rather than trying to manufacture your personality. Just go for it. And yeah, that is again, but we're talking about a guy in LeBron who's lived with the microscope peering at him since he was 16.
Yeah.
Jordan got a chance to kind of grow into that, right?
No, it's not.
Jordan
It's not easy at all.
yeah,
I just there's been glimpses of LeBron and who I believe he really is. Like when he's like cameras aren't directly on him, you see him at like an award show talking to somebody
yeah.
else like casually. I like that guy. That guy I can get out like, oh yeah, that guy seems like a genuine guy. Like who's not being fake. This is his personality. He seems like a
You
cool guy. But there's other times where you're just like. He's just like, well, when he did the press conference with the wine, or like he was walking with a glass of
yeah.
wine, or like it's like, well, who are you trying to fool here? Like, no one does that. That's not a
You
normal human being thing to do.
you like when he's on the shop and he's like, he's swearing.
I think that's
'Cause
as
that's
close
probably
to
who it is.
normal when there's a
Right.
direct
That's like
camera
a
on him as he's willing to be. I still don't think it's 100% his personality, but it's at least closer.
You know what's interesting, Jet? Because the two biggest athletes in our country are LeBron and Tom Brady. Brady now is being more of himself in Tampa than he was in New England. I can't tell you how many people I know, like New York Giants fans, Jets fans, whatever, that loved Brady after he won the Super Bowl with Tampa at that parade where he was shit faced.
Yeah.
They're like, I can relate to him now. He's a guy that's happy, won his seventh Super Bowl. He's hammered. He's throwing the trophy from one boat to the other, and that seems like a cool guy rather than this buttoned up person that was was with the Patriots for nearly 20 years. So like, and people were like, yeah, I like that. That's good. I like the Brady now that's kind of unfiltered, and I equate it to the Brady was the kid that went to private school all the way through high school, and you had to wear a suit, a tie, you had to have your hair a
Yeah.
certain length, you couldn't say anything. Now Brady's in college where all of a sudden, he can wear flip-flops, shorts, and a tank top and let his hair grow and be who he wants to be. And that's where he's at right now. And I think people kind of appreciate that more than this kind of facade that he put up. But again, we're talking about two athletes that are under the microscope. And then even to more of a point, LeBron's been under this since he's 16.
Yeah.
Like Brady really got to grow into this because he wasn't heavily recruited coming out of high school, was a 6th-round pick. We know all the stories, but he kind of grew into it. Even Jordan, even though he was a star at North Carolina as a freshman, not to the magnitude that LeBron was in high school, and not in an era of or a time of social media, which is just like, LeBron sneezes and it's a lead story on
Sure.
SportsCenter.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I just think it is interesting to me that some people would prefer the honest douche
Yeah.
versus the
Yeah.
seemingly nice. He's like, what's the guy's name from Leave It to Beaver? Wally Cleaver, right?
Eddie Haskell.
Eddie Haskell.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's who I feel like he is sometimes.
Yeah. We know that Eddie Haskell's up to something, but when he sees Mrs. Cleaver, oh, hi, Mrs. Cleaver, you look wonderful today. I love those pearls, and she's like, okay, Eddie, what are you
Because, like,
up to?
again,
like, yeah,
because of social media, because there's cameras everywhere. We've seen glimpses of what he's actually like. You're like, okay,
yeah,
I think that's what he's really like. And then he'll have the glass of wine when he's walking to the game. He'll have the purse sometimes. You're like, this is not who this guy is. who grew up poor with a single. This is not who he's ever been. He's just doing this for the cameras. It's annoying. As annoying and as much as I despise Kyrie Irving, I at least think he's authentic.
Yeah.
Oh my God, he drives me crazy, but he has no filter and does not put on airs for the cameras.
I know in a future podcast, we're going to compare Kyrie Irving to my favorite quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. Aaron Rodgers appears to be real, right? Because he doesn't give a flying F what you think. He'll just say what's ever on his mind. So, that's someone that's the complete opposite of LeBron James. He's very passive aggressive like LeBron, but that press conference he had at the beginning of training camp is just like gold. It was 30 minutes of him throwing the entire organization under the bus. I know a lot of people go, I don't want my quarterback to act like this. I'm like, for what we do, that was gold. 30 minutes was just phenomenal. Like, we don't see enough of that in sports.
All right, so we get a new class in the Hall of Fame, Sap. Speeches were pretty good. I think highlighted again by Chris Bosh's speech to me. I think Paul Pierce was the best player in that class, but Chris Bosh gave the best speech. And we'll be back next year when we talk about the Hall of Fame and see who gets in. I don't think it's supposed to be a particularly decorated class. I think Manu Ginobili is expected to be the best player in that class. Maybe your guy Marcus
Skip
Johnson
Bayless
sneaks in.
I hope Marcus Johnson.
Skip Bayless will be there. Yeah, he'll be there without
Skip
a doubt.
Bayless will be there from Manu. And there's one other guy that I'm going to start making a case to get into the Hall of Fame. I know we got to wrap up. It is the Basketball Hall of Fame, so we can obviously factor in how great they were in college.
Yep.
Why isn't Christian Laettner in the Basketball Hall of Fame? He, to me, is one of the 5 greatest college basketball players ever.
Yeah,
Kareem is the greatest college player ever. Bill Russell, Bill Walton, are probably the 3 greatest college players. You can throw Pete Maravich in there because he averaged 44 a game before the shot clock, which is just like doesn't even make any sense. But Christian Laettner went to 4 straight Final Fours, went to 3 championship games, 1-2, hit one of the most memorable shots in college basketball history, beating Kentucky back in 1992. Why is he not in the Hall of Fame? He was on the Dream Team. He was the 12th guy. You or I could have been the 12th guy on the Dream Team, and they still would have won the gold medal. But I wonder why there's no traction to get him into the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, it's a good question. If it truly is the Basketball Hall of Fame, I mean, he's certainly one of the greatest college players ever, without a doubt. I don't know
Dino
if
Rodgers in the Hall of Fame.
There's I don't know if there's an outright college basketball Hall of Fame. There is a college football Hall of Fame.
Football Hall of Fame. But Dino Rodgers in there, right?
Yeah, he is.
For international play?
Yeah, no, some of the international guys don't make any sense. So I if it's truly if you're putting in college guys too, then okay, I can see that for sure. All right, Sap, that's going to do it for the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are again presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out fullpresscoverage.com for this and lots of other great podcasts. You can find our podcasts wherever podcasts are found. Find all the show updates on our Twitters at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer. We're also on YouTube if you're not watching already, youtube.com/Jet Stryer. And we'll talk to you later, everybody. See ya.